Hey guys, welcome back to Tribe of Unicorns. I'm your host, Kendra, and today I'm sitting with Tanya Heidrich. Tanya is a multidisciplinary artist and designer. So, welcome, Tanya.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So, tell us what exactly that is.
So basically, I'm a bit of a mix between an artist and a designer. I specialize in creating black and white designs, especially patterns. And the multidisciplinary part of it basically means that I don't really just work in one medium. I work across a variety of different mediums. So anything from really the medium that I'm most known for is pen and paper. I also create murals. I will also work in a more digital realm. I'll blow things up to any kind of size, or they'll be tiny. They'll go on different kinds of materials and surfaces. But what really ties them together is the fact that it's always, or almost always, based around patterns inspired by my surroundings. So oftentimes focusing on something really specific. So the textures on a brick or the little lines in a leaf, and extracting that to then create something, to create a design of its own.
Oh, I love that. There's so many like tiny little worlds in ordinary things that you probably would never notice unless you were someone like yourself.
Yeah, it's definitely what's the term for it? Professional deformation, which is that, when you specialize in something, you see that thing everywhere.
Right.
And the more that I've been pursuing this as for my creative practice, the more that I dream of patterns. I will walk around in the street, and everywhere I mean, that has basically been most of my life. I really notice patterns, but now more than ever, just anything has the potential to be, to become inspiration.
Tell me how you, because you just mentioned you've kind of seen that all your life. How did you come to be in this place now? I mean, what's been your journey?
How far back do you want to go?
I love hearing about childhood because a lot of times people will come on and tell me, well, I was interested in this when I was 5, but then I diverted and then I came back to it. Is that a similar type of situation?
Yeah, kind of, but kind of. So yeah, basically, I think before I was even 5, for as long as I can remember, I just loved to draw, and I would always be the first person up in my family, and so my mom just kind of put together like a little pen and table station, and so I would wake up and just draw for hours before anybody else woke up. And I was really lucky to always be encouraged to draw, always have materials to draw with. And to go to a school that had a really good art program where I had teachers that pushed me and that taught me a lot. And I mean, I always just loved art so much that I ended up going to art school. And then when I was there, I really kind of experimented a lot. So I went in thinking I would be an illustrator, and then arrived and was kind of blown away by the illustrators. And the imposter syndrome really kicked in, and I was thinking I could never be an illustrator. I just didn't really see how my work would fit in there. I looked into sculpture for a while, and quickly felt that like I couldn't really envision myself as like a gallery type of artist, which is how sculpture had kind of been presented, or at least how I had understood it at the time. And so I geared towards graphic design because it made sense to me. I liked the fact that I was creating things beyond myself, that there was always an audience that you were thinking for, that there was something practical to it, that there were rules to learn and then rules to break. And so just the fact that like all these things that I had been doing, which was, focusing in on tiny details, that was something that kind of held me back. And something like sculpture, or at least that's how I had interpreted some of the feedback I got, was actually, an asset in design. So I graduated with a degree in graphic design, and this was in Baltimore. So at 18, I moved to the US because I grew up in Switzerland. I moved to the US, graduated with a degree in graphic design, and then I stuck around in Baltimore for 3 more years after that, where I first worked as a junior designer in branding and an ad agency in Baltimore. And for a bunch of different reasons, I ended up leaving there a little earlier than I had, I thought I would be there for years, but then
Right.
I started moonlighting for this tech startup. And, and so I ended up quitting the agency job and working as a freelancer. I always knew I was going to work as a freelancer someday because I just love the idea of being independent, of kind of, making your own rules, making your own schedule, like working really hard, but then still having some flexibility to like make your work life
Right.
adapt a little bit in some ways to your personal life. And so yeah, I started moonlighting for that tech startup, and that motivated me to then jump off and become a freelancer. And I was a graphic design freelancer for a few years. Um, I think it was maybe 2 or 3 years. And then at that point, I had decided to move back to Europe,
Mhm.
specifically to Switzerland for a little while. And it was this really big shift in my life where, I went from leaving this place that I'd called home for 7 years, that I had built a life at. And, I even left a relationship behind over there.
Mhm.
And moving to Switzerland, where I was a little bit lost. Most of my friends had moved away from there. I moved back in with my mom as I figured out what my next steps were. And I think this big shift in so many different parts of my life, like physically and on a personal in a personal way, made me start to really rethink also, my career and whether it was working for me. And if I was being honest with myself, I just couldn't imagine, being a graphic designer forever. I was already starting to feel a little bit underwhelmed by it. And
Mhm.
it had only been a few years.
Yeah.
And I've always been someone who's been really, very passionate about what I do, and I'll hone in and just do my best to get better. And I just wasn't feeling that at all with graphic design. I was sort of not really feeling like myself. And so because my expenses were so low at the time, because I was just staying with my mom, I decided to start pursuing to going back to this thing that I'd always loved doing, which was just illustrating. And so I still was doing some graphic design work, but I was also spending some time teaching myself the ins and outs of the illustration worlds. I also started entertaining the idea of surface pattern design, which had always felt a bit like a faraway dream. But then I started seeing all these interviews from people who had basically just done it thanks to the internet. And suddenly this thing that had always felt completely out of reach started to feel like it was something that I could maybe try to build for myself. Um,
Wow.
so yeah, I taught myself about the ins and out of the industry with a couple online courses,
Mhm.
YouTube videos, all that kind of thing. I built my portfolio and this Instagram account that I had kind of half-heartedly put up just to share my work when I was in the US and share it with friends and family and motivate myself to draw again. I started being much more intentional with it.
Mhm.
And from there, I just really started creating a lot more, and um, yeah, just really started pursuing this what my creative career is starting to look like, which is this ever evolving, ever changing thing. So even though I went into this thinking I'd be an illustrator, I don't really think that Illustrator proper, I don't really feel that my work or what I do properly fits in the Illustrator box. I don't think it really fits into the surface pattern designer box either. I think it's kind of like a mishmash of everything.
Yeah.
Same with now that I do murals, I'm not also like a full on street artist either. So I think that's why I think when you introduced me, it just, sounds like a mouthful to say multidisciplinary pattern artist and designer, but it kind of is all of those things at once.
Yeah. Well, I love that you did that. I love that you're comfortable kind of creating your own title on your own box. And I think that's why I love bringing people like you on the show, because it shows people you don't necessarily have to be an illustrator in the traditional sense, or, the fact that you were able to shift because it didn't feel like it was really filling your soul, or checking that box for you that it used to when you were a designer. and getting back to what felt good for you and having that courage is so admirable. And that's what these episodes are all about. Because if you're a student, if you're someone who is in an industry or a career that doesn't really feel fulfilling anymore, people like you give other people the courage to go ahead and take that chance.
Well, that's
So
very, very
bravo.
nice of you. I'll say it doesn't always feel that way. It's definitely not a linear, it's not an exponential and linear path. So I also want to like put out, a complete understanding of how it feels, which is like, I'm definitely progressing and I'm really proud of where I am. But at the same time, there's still so much more that I'd like to do to get to the place where I'm much more stable and where I'm really like, basically I'm not there yet, if that makes sense. And I think that when I often listen to interviews with people, and it's, people who usually have quote made it, it sometimes can feel like, but how did they make it there? And so
Yeah.
I try to be honest with where I'm at, which is I'm doing pretty well. But I'm also not there yet. And there's still so many challenges for sure. And I think part of it is also if you are kind of building your own creative niche, if you're not really, for example, like a full-on illustrator, not that that's ever easy, that's incredibly challenging in and of its own, but you beyond just having to figure out how to thrive within this world, you kind of have to create, you have to create a foundation for that world. So, when I go up to people and I try to pitch my design work, it means pitching to them the entire concept of having patterns in their space beyond what already exists before. And that takes a lot of time. And being ever present on the internet is a big part of it, like reminding people that you exist,
Right.
showing them all the different things you can do. But it's definitely a very, very slow process. And, you get little wins here and there, but it takes work and a lot of patience as well. And I'm still very much in the midst of it.
How do you deal with that? Because and honestly, like it's something I've heard from people who have quote unquote made it, that they still have that feeling of every day, like I'm still not where I want to be. There are still so many things that I want to accomplish and do. So what keeps you going?
I mean, it's this invisible thing where I just can't imagine doing anything else, and there's no better feeling than even just getting the smallest of accomplishments. It's kind of like, I don't know. I mean, it's kind of everything to me. It's something that just brings me so much joy. And I think that when you feel when something just feels so natural and true to you, I mean, everything that you put into it is worth it. Right.
Yeah.
And of course it's work, and of course, it's not always easy, but it's also just, I can't imagine doing anything else. I can't imagine quitting now. It just doesn't even feel like an option, to be honest, which is very much a privilege too, because I don't have, for example, a lot of people that I knew in the US, had a ton of student debt.
Right.
I live in a place where, I don't have to worry if I get sick about being able to go to the doctor. I don't have a family currently to support. So I do have, I am very lucky in that I have, even just being able to say like, oh, quitting and it's not an option, I realize comes from like a very narrow and privileged perspective. But because this is my experience, it really is how it feels to me, which is that I can't imagine ever giving up at this point.
Yeah. Well, I think it's very obvious from your social media too, that you seem to really love the process.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's relaxing. I often get the question, like, how do you have the patience to do this? And
Yes.
I mean, I don't have patience, like this brings me pleasure. So if it's your favorite thing to do, You don't need any patience for it. And I wish that I had all this patience people talked about, because then I could apply it to other aspects of my life.
Yeah, if you guys go on and check out Tanya's Instagram, I'll put her Instagram and all her links in the show notes, but it's truly mesmerizing. Like, I'm somebody who listens to a lot of ASMR videos, and it's the same type of feeling watching you draw these amazing patterns. It's like this calming zen. It's amazing. Plus, what an impact this kind of design must make on a space. I mean, I see, the murals that you do, they're just so different from what you typically see and so bold and beautiful.
Thank
What
you.
has been your coolest project, your coolest installation, the thing that you're like, oh, that was amazing?
Oof. I mean, pretty much anytime someone hires me to do work in my style feels amazing.
Yeah.
It's, going back to when I was working as a graphic designer, part of what didn't feel as fulfilling about it was that I didn't really have my own voice or my own style
Mm.
and, as a graphic designer. And so, so there were, just to be clear, I do like graphic design. It just did, it was much more of like a job, and whereas this is like a job and a passion.
Yeah.
But yeah, like it just, in this case, like the fact that people actually hire me to do something in my own voice, it just always feels amazing. One of the most surreal projects that I had was last summer. It was for a private commission, and I flew out to Seattle,
Mhm.
and the whole concept was to create a triptych of paintings that were inspired by the nature in Seattle again, for a private commission. And it was just amazing. I mean, my clients were so sweet. They were really nice people, and we were going around and exploring the nature. And I just couldn't believe that I was being asked to explore Washington State and get inspired by it. So that was pretty amazing. Anytime I get to paint a mural. So like this summer, I got to paint a mural for the town of Gland in Switzerland.
Oh, wow.
That's Gland, in case that's Gland, which is basically, it means acorn in French.
Okay.
And that was just amazing. Getting to paint a couple of murals for the town. Yeah, I mean, honestly, this is what I meant when I just said that, like, any time that anybody wants me to do what I want to do, it's amazing. And to do it for them, because every project comes with its own prompt, which is kind of where the design side of things come in. So I'll create things day in and day out, patterns from things I've seen in my surroundings, but I also love it when I get a specific prompt. So, if somebody asks me to make a drawing for their spouse that's inspired by their favorite hobby, or if somebody asks me, I did a couple of patterns for this pharmaceutical company. And so creating something inspired, by what they see under the microscope. I mean,
Oh, wow.
so exciting. I love problem solving. And
Yeah.
this is implementing design into this kind of fine artsy pattern world.
I find that myself when I get a new project. It's like such a thrill to take on a new challenge. Somebody has an issue, they have a problem that you need to solve. It's so exciting and really gets your brain moving and thinking about all the different possible solutions. It's so much fun. Even we were just talking earlier about the psychology of it, like getting
Mm-hmm.
inside of the client's head and then being able to show them what they're thinking in the real world is, I think, the coolest part of any creative process.
Definitely. And there's so much to learn, from anyone you collaborate with, but also any clients you have. I mean, people, I'm sure you have a similar experience, but like everybody that comes to you is in some way an expert in their own field,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so getting to work with a bunch of different clients or collaborate with different artists or designers, it's just amazing, because people bring you into their own world, and then you get to kind of be a tourist for a little while, get inspired, and try to create something that speaks the language of that world. And you get more intuitive in time, and sometimes it's kind of hard to explain why you made the decisions that you made. You're just like, well, this one makes sense because it wouldn't any other way,
Yep. And everyone makes you grow a little bit more, right?
Definitely.
So we talked a little bit about inspiration. How do you go about a project? Like, where do you, I guess it depends on the client, but where do you find inspiration?
Yeah, I mean, it depends so much on the client or the project. I find this is kind of a non-answer, but I find inspiration everywhere.
Yeah.
I mean, literally, I'll wait in the waiting room of my doctor and look at the ceiling, and then there's just like something weird that the like ceiling tiles are doing. Maybe there's water stains, and the water stains are really cool.
Yeah.
Or the way that, if I live in Valencia now in Spain, and there's it's a beachside city, and the way that like the sand interacts with the movement of water is ever changing and so interesting. Or plants. I mean, my God, plants are just a never ending source of inspiration. Sometimes I need to, space out my walks in the botanical gardens here, because it's just, there's too many ideas that come at once.
Yep.
But essentially, like, where I get my ideas is usually from really focusing on a little detail or a set of details, extracting them from their context, and then making them the stars of the show. And that's why I actually work in black and white. I mean, it's been something that's always felt right to me, but it's also because I find that just kind of getting rid of tone and working only with the highest contrast, which is white and black, really helps focus on these lines, on these details, in a way that the way that I work, I've always found color kind of confuses that process. So again, that's for me. I love color in other people's work, but black and white has always just been the way for me to express that the most clearly.
It's super powerful. I mean, I always think about process, or what's that saying? Is it, I can't remember whose quote it is. I'll pop it in later. But the idea that the best designs are the simplest designs, minimalizing and bringing it down to its elements, and really just focusing on as little detail as possible to get your idea across.
Yeah, I mean, I think that like that is true, and then I also think that the opposite is true. I think it just depends on the artist or the designer or the project or the context. I think it's really interesting how, with design and art, we kind of go through these cycles where it's like, less is more, and then it's more is less, and less is more, and it's like we kind of cycle through these different trends. But I think ultimately both are true, and I think that there are amazing ways to convey something with lots and lots of detail, and then there's amazing ways to convey things with really with minimal detail, or just minimal minimal amounts of information. And I think that that's kind of what you're saying with the psychology. It's kind of figuring out when that's appropriate, and when to scale up, when to scale down.
Yeah. So how has social media helped you market yourself?
A good amount. So I primarily use Instagram to market myself, but this year I've been focusing more on Behance as well.
Okay.
And it's basically when I moved back to Europe, and I decided that I wanted to create this shift in my career. I knew that I didn't have connections in the industries that I was trying to go into. I knew that I was only in Switzerland temporarily because I knew I was going to move. So I've been in Spain now for 1.5 years.
Okay.
And, I knew that it was going to just take a really long time to build the in-person connections, build the industry connections. And I didn't want to just completely, be on pause while that happened. And so I really put a lot of my focus on social media, and specifically on Instagram, because, that was the main visual platform. And so I started, really intentionally posting a lot. And beyond that, I really studied, how the algorithm worked, I really tried to figure out what things worked, what things didn't. I listened to interviews, I read up on it. And so I worked really hard, and took me maybe about 6 months of posting pretty relentlessly to get to my first 1,000 followers. And then from there, it just kind of, once you're on the sunny side of the algorithm, things kind of
build,
benefit you exponentially from there,
yes.
at least temporarily. So, I would get shared on one page, and then more people would find my work, and then a slightly bigger page or account would share my work. And so that has been really helpful in terms of getting some clients and getting more eyes on my work. But I think this past year and a half has also been a good reminder not to put all my eggs in one basket, because I've been talking about this a good amount in my stories lately, that, Instagram, and I'm sure I'm not the only one, because I've seen a lot of other people talk about the perils of the Instagram algorithm.
Yes.
But,
a lot of people are losing followers.
Definitely. And I mean, I've also been losing them because I've been expressing my opinions more, which is fine, honestly. Like, it's probably a good thing. But it's beyond losing them. It's just about, how many people actually see your work. Like, I can actively see that, now at, 80,000+ followers, I have fewer eyes on my work than I did when I had 30,000. So there's something that's active, like, and I mean significantly less. I mean, a quarter of or something. And that's not an accident, like, there's this is part of, for a while I benefited from this algorithm. And so I was kind of, not aware that all this stuff was going on. And then now that it's kind of an unrewarding algorithm now, where you can work really hard and it doesn't matter. And so it's been a really good wake up call to refocus my energies elsewhere and focus more on, outreach, focus more on other platforms. Like I said, I've been doing a lot more on Behance about, introducing myself directly to agencies, directly to local businesses here.
Right. That actual in-person networking.
Definitely. And I think it's actually a blessing in disguise, because I think I was getting too, what's the word? Is it complacent?
Yes.
Where it was just, I think it was too easy for a while. So I'm kind of glad that, it got a little difficult, because it's every time that happens, it forces you to reevaluate and reprioritize. And, I started a newsletter as well, and just trying to find ways to connect with people beyond this arbitrary algorithm that is ultimately determined based on Facebook and Instagram's bottom line, and not based on the success of creators.
Yeah, I get your newsletter. So, I'm curious about the business side of things. If somebody's looking to start something so niche, what is your maybe top 3 recommendations for actually starting this type of business? I mean, we just talked a little bit about social media and marketing, but where would someone start?
Well, I mean, first you have to, learn about, the industry a little bit, figure out how it works. I mean, I guess it depends how like where people are when they start, right? But so for example, when I tried to go into illustration, pattern design, and all that, I really needed to learn, like, oh, okay, so there are these, different like pattern fairs or conferences, and they happen in these different countries at these different times. Or, I had to start learning about just different, basic things about the industry. Oh, okay, so there's agents. Do I want an agent? And obviously another big thing is you have to build a portfolio.
Right.
And so if you're not getting paid to do the work, then build the work yourself, create the work that you want people to hire you for.
That's a great tip.
Yeah. And there's a lot of, talk about passion projects as being a really great way to advertise your work, and, basically create the work you want people to hire you for, because people won't hire you unless they can see that you can do it.
Right.
So for example, with murals, I knew that I wanted to go into painting murals, but I had no experience. So I knew that I could do it, because I know how to paint. I know that my designs I can scale up. Like I knew I could do it. I just needed someone to let me prove it.
Yeah.
So my first ever mural, I just, first I mocked it up. I mocked up in Photoshop my designs large scale to show people that I think that they can work. And I continue to do that to just remind people, like, even though I'm drawing on this little sheet of paper, this could work in so many, the same design could work so well in all different kinds of spaces and applications.
Yeah.
But yeah, and so then I just, I walked up to here in Valencia, I walked up to someone who I knew was coordinating murals in the city, and I told them I wanted to paint a mural, and it kind of just worked out. And I think Instagram kind of helped me in that way. It gives you that extra little boost of creativity. If somebody's maybe somebody wouldn't have considered me as much, and then they see that, like, oh, okay, there is like a pretty big interest in my work, and so they're more likely to think favorably about my work, which is a weird thing to say and admit, but it's true.
Yeah.
And yeah, and then from there, I basically, whenever I could get my hands on a wall, I would paint on a wall. So another one was at this live, really intimate live concert music event in Switzerland. And I was going to just exhibit some of my work. It was very, low-key, lovely event. And I asked if I could also paint a mural live while the musicians were playing. So that was just another way to get more experience, more eyes on my work.
Yeah.
And then after that, I started getting more paid jobs. And so, yeah, you really, if you want to start if you want to start in a new creative direction, you just have to do the work before anybody's going to pay you to do it. But that doesn't mean, doing all kinds of work for free.
Right.
Especially, I think that there are times to do, this is a big ongoing debate within creative industries, but, there are ways to do free work, but, ethically, it's good to do it in a way where you're doing it for somebody who's already giving something maybe to the community.
Right.
To do it in a way where if you're doing work for free, then make it clear that you have creative freedom as well, so
that's true.
To not go down that rabbit hole of, what is it? The exposure is, it's not a proper reward.
Right.
So
how many times have you gotten that?
Also for you.
Where someone will come to you and say like, oh, well, you're going to get so much exposure for doing this for free. It's like, no, that's okay.
Yeah. A lot. And I think also underpaid work is the same thing. It's like, oh, it's the bonus of exposure. And yeah, is there a single, freelance creative out there who hasn't had that happen over and over? Luckily this year I haven't had too much. I don't think I've had that happen this year, which is pretty good.
That's good.
But yeah, definitely. I don't think anybody's been free of that.
No, I'm sure, definitely beware of the client who approaches you for doing free work with the promise of future work or whatever it is. Know your worth.
And I think we all have to, we all make mistakes, and those are the things that teach us, even contests, when these companies or really any kind of group of people offer an opportunity, and but you have to apply with the design in order to be considered. That's also unethical, but I think we've all been there and we all have to just like educate one another and do better. But I think that it's really, really hard to always do really well. And so I think also just if you make decisions you end up regretting, then just kind of learn and then move on from them. And I think that I'm saying this not just to your listeners, but to myself too.
Yeah. Well, I think contracts, things like that are, I think initially something I didn't really think were too important until they really became very important. It is a business. You're not just, I remember struggling with the idea of charging people, a fair price when I loved doing it so much. It was hard for me to justify but this brings me so much joy. It's so much fun. How could I ever charge them what I really should be charging them? That was a mindset that I've gotten over the years, but definitely where I was at in the beginning, because it was just, I was loving what I was doing. So I didn't understand, not everyone can do that. Not everyone has that skill set.
Exactly.
So charging fair price for that, is very important too.
Yeah, and I think also what really helps me whenever I'm thinking about, do I really want to lower my price? And of course I do, I will lower my price. Like there's so many variables to think about,
Right.
but it's also just thinking beyond me, and so if I take a step back, I'm like, okay, well, if I lower my price any further, is that livable? Is this something that I can live off of? Because again, I come from a really privileged background where I have a safety net if things really fall apart, but not everybody else does. So if
Yeah.
I say that this pricing, that this kind of client client and designer relationship is acceptable, am I forcing other people who don't have the luxury to think about this
Very true.
to then work at those rates too? But I mean, figuring out your rates, that's just a never ending thing. It's really tough. And I'm figuring it out a lot from one country to the other. So
Yeah. It's kind of always a moving target, right?
definitely. I mean, for example, right now, because of the pandemic, I can't really, you know, go off and do international murals. And so I've been trying to do a lot more outreach to local businesses here, like in the city. But I understand that the amount that I can charge here because of cost of living, because of, how much these businesses make and what salaries are like here, that I can't charge here what I would charge in Switzerland.
Right.
And so I do have to significantly lower my rates. And a big part of figuring that out has just been, I've been messaging a whole bunch of different artists and asking them like, hey, how do you
Right.
charge? Because ultimately, I mean, plenty of people will be very secretive and they won't want to share. And there's a bunch of reasons for that. And I respect those reasons. But luckily, there are people who will share their rates with you, or at least share their thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is, it benefits everybody, right?
Oh,
So
definitely.
if I know how much they're charging, I know that not to undercharge.
Right.
But I guess like, because it is, there's not a ton of work out there right now. I guess maybe people are worried that you then undercut their prices, like
Right.
charge,
Right. Right.
10% less than them. But yeah, I don't know. I guess I'm just very grateful for people who do share their numbers
Yeah.
with me.
It's tricky. And, you have to think about how much value you're bringing to the client, and will they be able to, charge more, or will they get a return on this investment, and what would that be?
Yeah,
And thinking about it that way as well. you know,
definitely.
I think it's a little more easy for me to do in my industry because, a brand new brand or an app, a brand new website, that's easy to measure the impact that had on the business or
Right.
what it's going to have. It's harder to do with something you do. Um, there's not as much measurable, there's not as much data there to be able to say, well, you're going to make, XYZ after I create this for you.
Yeah, for sure. And actually, going back to your question about advice for people who are starting off, I think a big thing, and I'm actually stealing this advice from Meg Lewis, who mentioned this, I think,
Love Meg Lewis.
yeah, she mentioned this on Instagram, but I think she also said that it was in her podcast. That one of the big things about, if you want to be a freelance artist, designer, or whatever, freelance in general, that you have to be really just willing. You have to have the kind of personality that can adapt to circumstances.
Mhm.
And I mean, I think people can learn that, to a pretty great degree.
Mhm.
But you just have to understand that, like, whatever you anticipate things are going to look like, they won't. So for example, an algorithm changes. Okay,
Mhm.
now what's your strategy? Or a pandemic, breaks
Yeah.
out, and so for example, this year, the plan that I had really set out and that I had really invested in is that January, February, I mean, I had told myself this is going to be the mural year. Like I'm just focusing so much on like going out there and painting all kinds of murals. That's really what I want to do this year. So I spent so much time applying to festivals, to companies all over the world. And then the pandemic hit, and then almost 2 months of work just kind of went out the window.
Right.
And I hadn't been focusing as much on pattern licensing or anything like that. And but so now it's just about readapting something. Okay, like I won't be able to maybe reach out to US based companies, which are the ones who currently, in my opinion, but I could be completely wrong, but like, I think that they currently seem to see a lot more value in murals for events, for branding, for all kinds of things than what I'm seeing in Switzerland, and maybe to an extent in Spain, even though street art is a big thing here.
Right.
And so I kind of had to re-strategize. So like I said, now I'm trying to apply locally, but now there's another wave of lockdown. So, what do you do? And so it's like constantly just being willing to adapt. And, maybe when this is happening, there's more artistic grants because community leaders want to help artists. And so you just have to be able to constantly shift. And it's hard, I mean, I'm not going to pretend I didn't have multiple breakdowns this year, peppered throughout the year. Definitely, with a direct correlation with whenever there are new lockdowns. But like things have kind of worked out. There's opportunities I had this year that I never would have had if not for the pandemic, which is a really weird thing to say because I wouldn't have applied to them because I would have been focusing my energy elsewhere.
Oh, yeah, totally the same.
Yeah.
Completely. There were so many virtual events that I never would have even thought to put myself out there to be a part of. And it's really allowed me to, even just starting this podcast,
right.
It wasn't on my radar. And then, the pandemic happened and it was like, well, I have some time. So
right.
Let's get this going.
Definitely. It's same. Like I had been putting off, making a newsletter for ages. And then I suddenly had all the time in the world. I was like, well, I guess I'm going to figure out how to make a newsletter now.
Right. And I found, and I don't know if you felt the same way, like, especially very beginning of lockdown in the US, I felt this like urgency to somehow give back, to share what I knew, whether it be running a team remotely, or helping people be creative in this time. Did you feel that same pull?
Yeah. And I think kind of everybody felt like, how do I do something positive?
Yeah. How do I help?
Yeah, I definitely felt that way. And I continue to feel that way about pretty much every issue in the world, I want to say. So this is definitely going to stretch way beyond this pandemic, but it definitely. And what I was thinking was that, just thinking back to what people were telling me that they tend to enjoy from my work was people would say that they found it really relaxing to watch me draw. So I was making a lot more videos, like real-time drawing videos. I also was releasing a lot of coloring sheets for people to be able to color themselves. And I still do that actually with my newsletter. I still give them away, which is maybe not like the most, the best strategy financially, but
I think that's great.
But yeah, and it's just basically encouraging people to draw and to color, and also sharing insights in terms of how to find inspiration. So I would also, release prompts for people, how do you get inspired from the confinement of your home? So it's like, how about this week we focus on the bathroom? Like, what does the water in your bathroom look like? Is it drops? Is it condensation? Like, what would that look like if you tried to draw it?
Yeah.
And no, it was so cool. Honestly, I loved seeing what people created. It was one of those things which is so cliche, which is like, I think I got a lot more out of it than other people. Like, it definitely lifted my spirits.
Well, I think that's why we do what we do, right? We create these businesses because we want to check certain boxes in our life. And even saying that you always knew you wanted to be a freelancer, I think there's a freedom there to do this newsletter and give content and give ideas to people, where you probably wouldn't be able to do that if you were still working with an agency. You wouldn't have that kind of time.
Definitely. Yeah. Especially an agency in the US. That was a culture shock. The whole, 30-minute lunch at your desk thing was just having, 10 days off for the whole year, which I had to spend, flying back to Switzerland to see my family and then like rushing around and then, to see everyone and then rushing back. It was just, oh my gosh.
I always found that when design students would come to my studio after just graduating or even being an intern, like one of the most important things that I wanted to teach them was time management. Because
Hmm.
I remember getting out of school and starting to work for an agency, and I was like, oh, we don't have 3 months to work on this project now? What do you mean? It's due by
Yes.
lunch?
Oh my gosh. Definitely.
So
Definitely.
honing that skill of coming up with ideas, trashing ideas, moving on quickly, failing fast was something I always try and teach students. Like, this is a really important thing to learn.
Yeah, absolutely. And but yeah, then there's also like, for a lot for agencies to learn, which I think that they are learning this year about the benefits also of letting people have some flexibility on their schedules. And because there's countless studies out there that show that it's actually, if you give people more time off and more flexibility, that then they'll be better employees and the work that they'll produce will be better. So yeah,
Especially a
definitely.
creative person. Like, you know, they need that space to think and grow and be inspired and see different things. And I think a lot of places kind of have previously had lost that idea that time is money and nothing else mattered. But it does
Mhm.
matter though, like letting people explore. And like you were saying, how, you were walking around Washington and being inspired. You needed that. You couldn't have just done that within four walls.
Yeah, definitely. I will say though that when I mentioned that for me it was especially the case, like in that an agency in the U.S., is because I think that there is um, really like a culture in the U.S. that's like like you said, the time is money. I think it's taken to a whole other level there.
Yeah.
What I love about Spain is that there's much more of a balance, like a work-life balance. People will easily take an hour and a half for lunch, but that doesn't mean that then they don't come back and then work hard and maybe they stay a little later. But um, it's definitely like there's hyper capitalist thing that just ultimately is very intense, and it's
Yeah.
really like I still I still feel it a lot in me, this kind of guilt if I'm not being a workaholic for a week. And I actually talked to because I also have a couple friends here who are from the US, and they say it's the same thing. It's kind of just having to like let go of this idea that working all the time equals better or equals more productive, which it really doesn't. I mean, I know that when I'm working nonstop, sometimes I'm not more productive than if I had just taken a break and then come
Right.
back to it feeling fresh.
Totally, totally, totally. Yeah, it's why I left the studio I was at originally, because I just felt like there was a better way to do this. And I've always stressed that with my own team, like this is so fun what we get to do. And I think
Yeah,
if we lose that, like that sucks.
definitely.
Um, well, I just wanted to thank you so much for coming on today. I cannot wait for everyone to go to your Instagram and your Behance page and see all the incredible things that you create. And I'm going to put all your links in the show notes so we can share everything there. And I definitely go and sign up for the newsletter so you guys can get those creative prompts too.
Yeah, well, thanks so much for having me. This has been lovely. And oh, for the newsletter, I'm not really doing prompts anymore, just to
Oh,
yeah, just to put it out there. But maybe I'll bring them back. I don't know. But yeah, this has been such a pleasure. Thanks so much for having me, and I look forward to hearing this interview later.
yeah, yeah. I love talking to other creators. It's like a guilty pleasure kind of thing. You sort of get to vent and discuss process and with somebody who has the same kind of brain. So it's always fun talking to
Totally.
other artists.
And it's such a good learning experience. I love it.
Yes. Well, thank you so much, and we'll talk
Thank you.
soon. Thank you so much for coming on the show, Tanya. I love talking to other creatives, especially about how they market their businesses. I think it's something really eye opening for you guys to see, especially someone who had pretty good success on Instagram initially, and then have seen those algorithms change and what that's done to their growth there. So I think it's a really interesting concept of obviously not putting all of your eggs in one basket and what works for some people may not work for everyone. I'm curious what you guys have found successful in your business as far as marketing and social media goes. How are you getting your message out there? How are you connecting with your ideal clients? Come find me on Instagram and send me some DMs. And if you would like to be a unicorn, also, come to tribeofunicorns.com and apply to be a speaker. We are currently trying to fill out the second quarter of this year. We have the first quarter already booked, but I love connecting with new people. So, tribeofunicorns.com, fill out the form, tell me why you're a unicorn and why your message needs to be heard on this show. Thanks, guys. We'll talk soon.